Shabbat Shalom. Wonderful to be with you as always and draw some inspiration from our Torah portion, our Parsha, as we sit into Shabbat together. So we have a double Parsha this week, Vayechel Pekudei. And I want to share with you an image from Vayechel that I find to be quite striking. In this Parsha, we have the description of the process of building the Mishkan, the tabernacle, as this kind of temple on the move where the divine can dwell among the people. And instructions for how it's built are incredibly detailed. Part of what is constructed in the Mishkan is a large bronze bowl at the entrance of the tent to be filled with water so that the priests can purify their hands and their feet before serving at the altar. And the surface of this bowl is made with mirrors of the women who served at the entrance to the tent of meeting. That's what it says. Mirrors of the women who served at the entrance to the tent. So who are these women, and why were their mirrors used to construct this important vessel used by the priests? One idea from Ibn Ezra, the medieval Spanish commentator, suggests that these were righteous women who donated their hand mirrors to the Mishkan as a symbolic act of denouncing personal vanity in service to the divine. And the medieval commentator Rashi offers a different interpretation, a midrashic explanation. He says that first, Moses actually rejects the mirrors. He's angry that objects associated with vanity should be used in the construction of this holy temple. But then God tells Moses to accept the mirrors because they've been used for a holy purpose during the Israelites' enslavement in Egypt. And there's a midrash that the Israelites during their enslavement, they were bone weary, they were exhausted from the hard labor, the avodah kasha of slavery. So much so that they had lost inspiration to continue bearing offspring, to continue bringing forth life. But the women knew that even in the midst of that hopelessness, the continuation of life was sacred. And so they brought these mirrors to their husbands and showed them their faces in the mirrors, teasing them and reminding them of their beauty, sparking the flame of that love and desire and will to procreate. So perhaps this mirror gazing was an act of vanity, but it in some way enabled life to continue from the midst of great suffering. And so it brings the question, is there a place for vanity on the spiritual path? As you may have noticed, meditation practice can be very quick to illuminate our habit of mind of what we call selfing, fixating on ourselves, fixating on everything I, me, mine. And it's true that too much selfing, too much of this fixation can lead to suffering and disconnection. It can block us from access to the gratitude and humility and curiosity that can emerge when all of that self-consciousness ceases. We can be more in touch with one another, with our interconnection. And yet, there is also an important place for noticing and affirming our beauty and our goodness and our worthiness, especially in a culture when many of us are conditioned towards heavy self-criticism and not enoughness. When we start to perceive and understand our innate interconnection to one another and to the planet, we also start to see the way that responding lovingly to that external world really begins with loving ourselves. And there's a way that we can find a beauty within us that persists even in our lowest moments. There's a kind of nobility in who and what we truly are. There's like an innate nobility and beauty. When we see that in ourselves, we can help others to see it too. We can offer it up on the altar as a profound expression of love and sacred service to life, to the continuation and flourishing of life. And this innate inner beauty that has to do with who we truly are is perhaps deeper than what appears on the surface, right? So it's not necessarily about how we physically appear. It's deeper than that. These mirrors were used as vessels for purification, right? At the base of this bowl. And there's a way in which we sometimes must purify our own and others' projections and expectations of how and who we're supposed to be and present in the world, in order to really allow that true innate beauty of our essence to shine through. Beauty is clearly an important soul trait in our tradition. The Mishkan's instructions include ornate descriptions, crimson and gold and fine twisted linens, embroidered tapestries, precious stones. Beauty is this divine quality of life, of being, that nourishes and feeds our soul. And attending to it, caring for it, expressing it is part of what it means to create a temple, a sacred space that can be within us, in our own bodies, in our homes, on the planet. But that's a beauty making that comes not from a place of ego or self-criticism. It comes from a place of love. In our Parsha, it's written that the craftspeople who were assigned to construct the Mishkan are endowed with Chacham Lev, which literally means wisdom of the heart. So it's from love and care that the wisdom emerges, that we need to tend to our inner and outer sanctuary as well. It's this love and care, which is really what makes something beautiful, which is really what makes something a fitting dwelling place for the divine. And so with this inspiration, I want to invite us into our practice, settling into that mishkan, that sanctuary in the body, that posture that will be supportive for mindful presence, for awareness. So I invite you to take a moment just to settle in, inviting the body to soften and relax if there's any tension. Allowing the mind, the attention to recollect here in the present moment. Arriving again from our doing, from all the activity of our lives, of our minds, just to be here. Allowing the attention to rest on an anchor in the present moment, something in the body, the breath. And as we settle in, I want to invite you to imagine someone. It could be someone from your present life or someone from the past who deeply and unconditionally loves you, who really sees you for who you truly are. Imagine that person lovingly gazing upon you. What do they see? What do they see? Can you see yourself through those eyes? That innate beauty of who you truly are. Meeting whatever is arising in our hearts and our minds with kindness, with gentleness. Practicing seeing ourselves, holding ourselves in that light of clarity and care. Can we meet ourselves in each moment the way that this beloved person would meet us, would hold us? Or the way that we would hold a dear friend. Just resting our attention in the present moment. We're practicing meeting, holding, seeing ourselves in each moment. With love, with compassion. And can we sense into that inner nobility, that innate beauty and integrity of our very being? The sacredness, the enoughness that we already are. We'll take a couple moments at the end of our sit here to imagine as we go about our days, our weekend, interacting with the people in our lives. We practice seeing that innate beauty, that innate worthiness and sacredness within them as well. We see those who we encounter through those eyes. We seek to see them as they truly are. I invite you to take 5 deep breaths. And as you're ready, you can open your eyes if they've been closed. Thank you so much for your practice, for your kind attention, for your presence. May we all be blessed as we move into Shabbat to be in touch with our innate beauty and worthiness and enoughness, to see ourselves through those eyes of love and to see one another and relate to one another in that way as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. Amen. Amen. Friends, we seal our practice as we do each day, offering an opportunity for those of you who are in mourning or observing a yard site to, or if you're accustomed to join in the mourner's cottage, to do so. If you'd like, you're welcome to put the name or names of those you're honoring today in the chat box now or after you recite Kaddish. And if you are not reciting Kaddish, please be encouraged to stay present, help create a minyan of comfort and support for those who are. And I invite you, if you are reciting the Kaddish, to join me by rising in body or in spirit. And you can unmute at this time. Thanks to Kat for sharing the words of the Kaddish on the screen. Yitkadal, Kadash, Merabah, Yalmat, Ivrach, Yiretev, Yamlich, Likute, Chayechon, Yamechon, Hayet, Beit Yisrael, Agala, Zman Karev, Imru, Amen. Shmei Rabba Olam Hameh Yah. Ach Yishtabach Ar V'Yitalev V'Yitalev V'Yitalal Shmei Ela Min Kol Birchata
Amen.
B'chata B'nechemata Amiran B'am Shlama Rabba Min Shabaya Chaim Aleinu
Shalom b'mamav, hu yaseh shalom aleinu,
Shalom
Israel,
B'Ramav Shalom Aleinu B'Yisrael
Amen.
Elkol Yoshe Tevel Imru Amen. Friends, thank you so much for joining us today. As always, beautiful. It's just been a beautiful week of practice together, and we look forward to another full week next week as well. And of course, want to thank Kat for holding our space and our teacher today, Rebecca Schisler. It's really just become such a lovely tradition to for us all to enter into Shabbat together and to set our intention for Shabbat practice together with Rebecca, with these beautiful teachings based on the Parsha. As always, you're invited to stay on for conversation with Rebecca today about the teaching, or if you'd like to just have a chance to share your reflections on your experience in the chat. You all also, an option is to just to stay present and use the next 15 minutes or so to stay with your practice if you'd like, just to use the structure, the container of this community right now to extend your Shabbat practice for another few minutes. Welcome to do any or all of the above. Of course, if you're leaving us now, I want to wish you a sweet, restorative Shabbat and weekend, and we'll look forward hopefully to seeing you next week on Monday at our normal time. So Shabbat Shalom to those who are leaving us now. And if you do have a question for Rebecca, keep an eye on the chat. And please, if it's a question, please preface it by writing question in all caps. Another really beautiful teaching, Rebecca. Thank you so much. Well, there's a lot. I feel like there was a lot to talk about, but it's also just a lot to absorb. It's just a really, really powerful teaching. I guess what I wanted to ask you, the question that rose for me from the teaching, and that I guess I was struggling with in applying it to the practice myself. Struggling is probably a little too strong. Just kind of questions that I noticed arose is the resistance that comes up to your invitation, as I take it. You can please correct me if I'm paraphrasing it wrong. Invitation was, in a sense, like to notice our own beauty, nobility, that that mirror represents the sacred power of that for us to notice our own nobility, right? But then there's like the dark side of that, the shadow side of kind of I can hear, the voice, narcissist, the voice that arises, or the self-absorption, or the danger. So I guess the question then presents itself is that how do we notice and be aware of that as a danger, self-absorption, self-celebration, basically just focus on the self, which can come up when we start looking in the mirror. How do we use that? I mean, you kind of did this in the set, but it's an invitation to revisit it. How do we use the practice to save ourselves, to take in the sacred power of that without getting sucked into, that desire to overly celebrate ourselves, or overly focus on ourselves, or overly focus on or become fixated, like Narcissus.
Yeah. Yeah.
didn't end well for him. You don't want to go down that path.
Totally. And it can be a fine line, I want to say. And I want to affirm also that, like, I feel like especially today, I've been thinking about this a lot in the context of social media, that medium where so much of it is really focused on the self. Like, so much of what people are sharing, it's like, it's me, it's mine, it's everything about me. It's a lot of selfies. We live in this kind of selfie culture.
I'm humbled.
And I think it is a culture that, like, it in a way is promoting a kind of narcissism that we do need to become curious about and aware of. So I want to say that to affirm that I think it is a challenge of, like, the times that we're living in, and not to feel shame or like beat ourselves up about it if we see that. It's like very normal. It's something very common, especially that comes up in practice. Again, this idea of selfing. We start to notice just how much of our attention and thoughts are kind of fixated on ourselves and our lives. So it's very common. It's a very common experience. And then we actually talked about this in the week-long intensive that I led on happiness and joy. This sense that, like, really the most powerful cause of happiness and actual fulfillment is kindness and compassion and care towards others. That's where real fulfillment and happiness comes from. Mm-hmm. In a way that might feel a little countercultural in a society that really emphasizes individual success, which is not necessarily how most people live throughout the world, or how our people or we have lived throughout the past generations. And so what I want to say is that I think it's about balance, because we can also go too far in the other direction of heavy self-criticism, like really intense self-criticism. And I think there's an interesting way actually often in that how that heavy self-criticism can even be paired with the narcissism. It's like we can swing, right? From those poles, because that kind of relating to ourselves is conditional on how beautiful we are, how successful we are, how we're perceived by others. Which is a different thing than appreciating our innate and enoughness and sacredness that is unconditional, that is by virtue of simply being alive, of simply existing. And so that's kind of where I was directing us in the metaphor of the mirrors as a vessel of purification, that we actually need to purify that mirror. So it's not about becoming kind of obsessed with how we appear to ourselves and others on the surface, but it's about getting in touch with that deeper sense of innate and intrinsic worthiness, so that we can relate to ourselves and others and everything that's alive with that awareness. And the last thing I'll say on that is shifting that tendency to be so focused on ourselves to start to focus more on others and the world can be a cultivation practice. So it's something that we can cultivate.
So can you say, I'm just going to hit pause there for a second. What do you mean by cultivation practice?
So some practices in mindfulness are practices of awareness and concentration, right? Practices that help the mind to steady and to settle, practices that help the kind of lens of perception to be cleared, so that we can just start to see things, perceive things more directly, more clearly. And then there are other practices like the metta tradition of loving kindness from the Buddhist tradition. And we have adopted it in the Jewish mindfulness world as like a kind of blessing practice, or loving chesed practice. Those practices are more cultivation practices, where we are practicing certain mind states, certain directions in the heart, and focusing on certain traits in order to help incline the mind in that direction, and even wire in new neural pathways and cultivate habits. So practicing focusing on other people and caring for others and getting curious about others is something, it can be a practice and more of a habit over time.
That's very helpful. And I'm just noticing in the chat, and you touched on this in that last answer. There's some people are noticing that, like, sometimes, like, for some people it might be like narcissistic tendencies that are brought out by this, and in others, or maybe it's just this other flip side of the same coin, it's a sense of unworthiness or shame that's elicited, especially by that image that you invited of imagining yourself being regarded by somebody who deeply loves you and is concerned for you, which can elicit this kind of resistance of either unworthiness or discomfort with being the focus, right? Yeah. So that maybe speak a little bit more to that side, because it strikes me that that's like maybe there's an opportunity for that cultivation practice of, wow, very difficult for me to receive that, right? Right. And so then just throw this in also, that I was thinking in terms of qualities to cultivate there, because you focused on like the aspect of worthiness that has nothing to do with merit, right? Or earning it. It's just kind of by virtue of existing. And kavod, or, honor, respect, and innate, we'll use the word nobility. I would think like kavod is like a Hebrew term I would associate with that of, of innate worthiness, just for being, just for existing, which is a practice for, I don't know if I've been another human being for whom that isn't a practice, right? Too, because we're so acculturated to earning our keep, earning our worthiness by what we produce.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. So I want to say a few things in response. I remember when I first started meditating, I had two stories, one from the Buddhist tradition, one from the Jewish tradition, that really speak to this. One of my teachers who teaches in the Buddhist tradition, Spring Washem, I remember her telling a story that when on her first retreat, she was on retreat with Jack Kornfield, and he spoke, I think from the Pali Canon or one of the teachings of the Buddha. He just said, "Oh, nobly born, remember who you are."
Mm-hmm.
"Oh, nobly born, remember who you are." And it just like blew through her. She's like, oh my God, like there's something that just feels so true and important about that. And I remember also on, I think my first retreat with Rav James Jacobson Meisels from Or Halev, he taught, I think it's from the Talmud, a story about, or maybe it's from Chassidut, like basically this image that we are sons and daughters, children of the king, but we are sons and daughters, children of the servant or of the handmaiden.
Mm-hmm.
And the same idea that like it's like, remember who you are. We are B'Tselem Elohim. We are sacred, made in the image of our creator. Life is sacred. We are part of that life, so how can we treat ourselves in that way? And I want to also, in response to the first part of your question around like, how do you find that balance between, to keep from swinging between like the narcissism and self-absorption, or like the shame and the self. There's this midah, this soul trait of anava in our tradition, balanced humility. And one thing that I really appreciate about the Jewish tradition is that we are saying, like, it is true that we are B'Tselem Elohim, we are in the image of our creator, we are sacred beings, we are worthy of that kind of treatment and care. And in the teachings around Musar, like cultivating ourselves, cultivating our character in regards to anava, to balance humility, we also recognize that we are really vessels for the divine, meaning that all that praise really is directed at God, and the way that the holiness, the intelligence, the brilliance of the spirit of life manifests through us, which is not something that I, Rebecca, came up with, or that you, Mark, came up with. That is something so much greater. And that is the kind of being to whom all that praise is due. And so what is the difference between that kind of praise that's focused on ourselves versus acknowledging and giving thanks to that spirit of life and intelligence and beauty and blessing that manifests through us? And so anava, balanced humility, is about not playing it small and not taking up too much space, but finding that rightful place, that sense of balance, that seat of balanced humility and integrity in any given moment.
Excellent commercial as well for awareness and action during the Omer, people. This is exactly what we'll be doing. So, all right, let's close. Thanks so much, Rebecca. So this has been every Friday's just a real treat. And it also kind of feels, it's nice. It feels like we always have a nice sense of community, but it feels also like there's a special Shabbat community that's, coalescing around this on Fridays, which is really especially lovely. So thank you so much for helping to build that. And thanks for all of you who are building it together. And Kat, thanks to you for holding us in our space. And we hope to see you all next week on Monday, and wish you a sweet, restorative Shabbat of absorbing that beauty, nobility that Rebecca beautifully taught about today.